At the Mexican Ministry of Finance. I'm your host, Julian Vigo. Today's guest is Ricardo Gómez-Carrera, Quality Lab. He is also a PhD candidate, particularly on how early human capital investment shapes long-term educational and economic outcomes. Long-term educational and economic in economics using administrative data and he has been recognized with the Joaquin Chirao y Casa Economics Award and in Mexico and France. Prior to his doctoral studies, he worked as a research economist at Mexico's Central Bank and served as Director of Domestic Debt Issuance at the Mexican Ministry of Finance. I welcome Ricardo Gómez-Carrera to Savage Minds. I'm so happy to have you here today. I contacted you after reading the 2026 World Inequality Report that you are part of. In fact, you're the coordinator of the report.
Yes, exactly. Yes, the World Inequality Report just came out a month ago. We just published it a month ago, and it's a work that encompasses a lot of researchers, so more than 200 researchers worldwide in all the regions of the great regions of the world. We have researchers from a lot of countries, and this report synthesizes some of the main findings of their research of the research we do here at the World Inequality Lab over the existence in the past decade, but also stressing the new findings that we had in the last 4 years. So this is the third edition of the World Inequality Report. The first one was published in 2018, and we publish one every 4 years to track how inequality has evolved, but also to disseminate the new research that has been done here in the World Inequality Lab.
One thing I would like is if you could explain what economics means to our audience, because a lot of people who haven't studied economics understand it practically, such as how much money did I spend on groceries last month, or how much money do I need for petrol next month? To the layperson, economics has a very realpolitik sense to it. But when you explain global economic inequality, this becomes even more difficult to understand because the numbers are so great and so abstract, and so are the comparative values of what money means or what economics means. Since many people assume, rightfully or not, that the fruit seller in Dakar or Bogota or Bologna or Paris will necessarily earn different wages, even though they have the same profession.
Well, first, yes, economics affects us in our everyday decisions. No, economics is about how much we earn, how much we own, how much we spend, how much we save, and this is at the personal level, at the household level, but it is also at the government level. So the decisions that the government take in spending, in one type of policy, spending in another policy, saving, having debt. And it is also the decisions that international actors, such as countries, take in different kind of policies. So economics is everywhere. And yes, when we talk about global inequality, there's two dimensions that we explore in the report. One is the one that you are addressing, so the one that it speaks to inequality between countries or between regions. And yes, we document in the report that there is a very large inequality between regions and between countries. So the average income in North America, for example, is way larger than the average income in South and Southeast Asia or Sub-Saharan Africa. It's way more larger, and this is even when accounting. So we standardize all our figures, so they account for different prices, so the purchasing power that people have. And even then we see that inequality is very large, and this not only reflects differences in productivity or infrastructure, but it also speaks to the different models and the different institutions that different countries have chosen over time, and different imbalances and institutional arrangements at the international level. But this is only when we speak, so this is the first aspect, when we speak about inequality between regions or between countries. But more importantly, we also talk about inequality within regions or within countries. And for that, we analyze the whole population, the whole distribution of the population. So for example, let's say we have 100 individuals and we line them up and we analyze in these 100 individuals how the richest one compares to the poorest one. So the one in the 100 to the one in the one. But then we aggregate those because that would be very complicated. So what we mainly do is that we take the poorest half of these 100 individuals. Let's say that there is a country with 100 individuals. We take the poorest 50% and we compare those to the richest 10%, which we will call the richest 10% or the top 10%. And then we also do comparisons with the middle class, with the middle 40%. And we document that inequality is very large. Well, it has been very large and it's still increasing when we compare these different groups. So for instance, if we look at how much the top 10% earn, so the average income of the top 10% at the global level, so this is not taking just one country, but one region, we see that the top 10% earns 53 of the global income, 53% of the global income. So this is huge. So 10% of the population owns 53% of the global income, while 8% of the population, 50% of the population earns 8% of the global income. So there's this huge disparity. And this is only when we talk about the global income, which is highly unequal, but it is not as unequal as wealth.
That was shocking to see that the top 10% own 3/4 of global wealth.
Yeah, exactly. And let me to explain what do we refer when we talk about income or wealth, which are two of our main measures. So income is the money you receive regularly. It usually comes from your job or a business or government benefits. And wealth is the value of the assets that you own minus what you owe. So this wealth includes your savings, your house, your investments, your possessions, and we subtract the debts, so like loans. And we see that the top 10% of the global population owns 3/4, 75% of all of what there is to own at the global level. This is huge, 75% in just 10% of the population. And then the poorest half of the population only owns 2%. So we see that the level at which we are is very concentrated at the top.
In your country sheets, at the end of your report, you have a representational list of 40 different countries, among which Algeria, China, Chile, Hungary, Niger, South Africa, Turkey. Why was this specific list of countries chosen over others? Or does this list change?
Well, I would say there's three main reasons. So this project, the World Inequality Database, here in the World Inequality Lab, we manage the World Inequality Database, which is a database that measures inequality at the global level, but also at the country level. So we have information for 216 countries, and we can measure the distribution for these countries. And we have information since several years ago. So for most of them, since 1950 to the present, some of them even since the 1800s. So we have a very long series, a very long data set with which we can measure inequality. When it started 10 years ago, this project, it was mainly focusing on the richest countries, which are also those countries that have the best data. As we have advanced in this decade, we have broadened we have included more countries into the main countries that we studied due to data availability. And a few years ago, it was 33, and now we have moved up to 48 countries. So here I will speak a little bit about an ongoing project that we have. in June of this year, we will release the Global Justice Project, which is a very big project we are working on. So the second reason why I chose these countries is that the main countries that we analyze in this Global Justice Project are consistent with the ones that I chose for this report. And the reason that we chose those countries for the global justice is that these countries are representative of, I think, 85% or more of the global population and 85% or more of the global GDP. And they are representative of different developmental stages. They are the representative of different regions of the world. And they're also countries for where data availability and quality is better. So this is the reason why we chose this list, and we would like to have all of them, but we are also subject to the availability and the quality of that the governments can release. So I think a good thing would be for governments to make more data available, so we could available and in quality, so we could keep doing this analysis and improve the analysis with the better data that we can access to.
What are the most striking shifts in global wealth distribution you've observed since the previous report? What has changed? What hasn't?
Well, the impressive thing is that even if we have reported that wealth is concentrating very rapidly at the top of the distribution, and we see that it is still the case. So even if we reported this 4 years ago, we see that if we compare the average growth of the wealth by different deciles or by different wealth groups, we see that the growth of the very, very top, so the individuals which are in the top one or even above the top one, so the top 0.01% of the distribution, wealth growth there is going as high as 8% per year. So the growth of wealth is growing as high as 8% a year. So this means, okay, and if we compare this to the growth in the bottom 50, which is it's around 3.5% per year, we see that there's this large difference. So 8% versus 3.5, it seems large, but it doesn't seem that much. But this is growth, annual growth. And if we take into account the baseline from which these wealth levels are growing, we see that, for example, an average, and if these trends continue in the next year, a person in the bottom 50% would earn like about 230 euros extra. Well, not earn, they would own 230 euros extra next year because the baseline is low. But a person in the top of the distribution would earn an additional 285 millions in the next year of euros. So just because of the baseline and the rate at which wealth is growing. So we see that the wealth is rapidly growing, wealth concentration is rapidly growing, and wealth inequality is increasing a lot.
And how does the World Inequality Lab navigate the lack of transparent financial data in certain regions in order to ensure that the World Inequality Database remains the most extensive historical record of economic evolution?
I think that we do that. Well, we standardize the methodologies across countries, and we not only use survey data. So what is typically done is use survey data that the countries usually have. But this is very good data, very useful. But the downside of using only survey data is that they typically underestimate incomes at the very top of the distribution, which is a very important place where we want to study inequality. So we complement this data in survey data using administrative records and national accounts. And we standardize the methodology using our DINA guidelines, which are like the distribution of national accounts guidelines that we use to standardize data within all countries, across all countries. And we also access, well, when we have the possibility we also have access to, well, when there's this kind of filtrations like the Panama Papers or like the Bloomberg list or Reuters list or stuff or lists like that that can enable us to measure inequality, we make use of those.
Excellent. I'd like to get to some of the criticisms that have been leveled at this report. Let's begin with some of those economists who contend that much of the rising wealth documented in the report is actually driven by the rise in real estate prices caused by restrictive zoning and building laws, rather than being a fundamental flaw in capitalism. What have you to say in response to those critics?
Well, I would say that the wealth is not only increasing in housing prices. I mean, it's true that the wealthier can outbid the less wealthy in housing prices. So if you have more wealth, you can you can you can purchase at a higher price, so you can outbid me if I am trying to buy the same house as you are, that than you are trying to buy. So inequality exacerbates inequality because of this initial lack of opportunity. And also these housing laws, well, are they speak to one of our main conclusions in the report, that inequality, it's not going to fix itself by a natural evolution. It needs us, it needs our will, it needs us to be politically active, democratically active, and it needs that the political will of the people that govern us to change the regulations, to change the laws so inequality can be reduced. So if housing laws are producing inequality or reinforcing inequality, then it's a way in which when we can reduce inequality. But there's also other aspects in which by which wealth inequality is increasing. So financial assets are the prices of financial assets are increasing at a very fast pace, and we see that we know that the wealthiest, so the people at the very top of the distribution, most of their assets, even though they have a large share in real estate, they also have a larger share, an even larger share in financial assets. And let's think, like, who has access to the financial assets? So it's people, mostly the richest people. And if these assets keep increasing at a faster pace, then wealth inequality keeps exacerbating. Also, there's other mechanisms at play that we document in the report. We see that there has been a wave of privatizations in the last decades, which has increased fortunes of the private hands. Globalization and technology have also contributed to increase inequality because now capital can flow to one jurisdiction to the other, and it's more difficult to track. So these are all policies that help reinforce wealth inequality, besides the real estate characteristic that you mentioned.
Other critics of the World Inequality Report are economists who have criticized the theoretical models, specifically Piketty's R greater than G thesis, for assuming that capital and labor are highly sustainable. Many scholars also argue that they are poor substitutes, meaning that the rate of return on capital would likely fall faster than predicated if capital accumulation increased. So what are your thoughts on this line of criticism regarding Piketty's thesis and the implementation thereof?
Well, we prove with the data, like not just theoretically, but we have proven in different papers. So not only the recent one that is going to be published in the Global Justice Project, but in different papers using the data, that it is right that the growth of capital, the rate at which capital grows, is higher than the growth of income. And this is just the average, no? And this calls back to my previous message regarding the growth of wealth, and so at the average, capital is growing faster than income. But then we see that at the very top, it's even growing faster for the already very rich. And well, in also, if we were to analyze historical wealth to income ratios, we see that again there was a reduction of these. So there was a very high level of wealth to income ratios before the so in the 19th century, and then it reduced during the period of the two wars, of the world wars, and it has since the 1980s it has started to increase again, the ratio of wealth to income, and now we are at like in the recent history we are at a maximum. We are at a maximum level in the recent decades. So in the data we also see that this is true.
And how much of the massive increase in wealth from this latest report do you think was caused by lockdown? Meaning, during the first year of lockdown, we already saw economists arguing that there was a very clear, a very visible growth of the hyper-rich.
Well, we don't document this in the report, but we implicitly or indirectly document that there has been a very large increase in the prices of financial assets, which is what I recall happened a lot during the pandemic. So more people were in lockdown, more people were experiencing it with retail with retail applications, so they can go into the trading market, and we saw that prices of the financial assets increased. And if I recall well, it was concentrated in a very few hands, and so I think this is one of the main drivers that increased wealth during this period.
Another criticism took aim at the report, stating that its focus should remain on eliminating absolute poverty rather than relative poverty. Those critics point out that while the rich are getting richer, global poverty has dropped significantly, and that the poor are often becoming richer in absolute terms as well. These are their claims. Are there merits to their arguments?
Well, I agree with that. We should focus in reducing absolute poverty. I think it is imperative for us to try to make everyone's conditions better, and if we can reduce poverty and we can give more access to basic needs to more people, I agree that this is something that we should pursue as a society, as a global society. But then again, if we don't address inequality, then we will end up in a world where a privileged few have more rights, more access to opportunity, more access to assets, more control over our political sphere, over the political decisions. And so even if 90% or 99% of the population are paying their taxes, are contributing to society, are being so are participating justly to society, if this 1% or the top, they even further above, if they have this disproportionate influence over politics or disproportionate access to opportunities, and they can influence the decisions to help them preserve their privilege, well, then it is just going to be not sustainable, no? Because it's going to be a world in which all the wealth that we produce, the income that we produce, is going to be concentrated in just a few hands. So I don't see how that model is sustainable in the longer term. And this is also only accounting for the socioeconomical part, but we have not addressed the environmental part, which is that the richest contribute much more to the global emissions, to the damaging of our planet, to the habitability of our planet, and they are better prepared to confront the damages. So the wealthy can, if there's a disaster, they are better prepared to smoothen the disaster, to adapt to the disaster, to move to another place, to have insurance. While the poorest, even if they contribute less to the global damage, to the environmental damage for our planet, they are the ones who are more vulnerable to the potential damages that could happen. So in both dimensions, the socioeconomical one and the environmental one, I think the model is just not sustainable in the long term.
Well, this brings me, in fact, to the 7th chapter of your report, which covers some of the solutions. And I think the major thing I took away from your report is that it seems that global taxation of multi-millionaires and billionaires is advocated and would produce excellent results across the globe. This is interesting to me because, as you know, Americans shudder at the thought of higher taxation. Yet, this seems to be something incongruent to historical knowledge. Because, as you know, politicians in my country regularly, left or right, Democrat or Republican, pass the election cycle promising Americans that they will lower taxes, okay? At the same time, many Americans are completely ignorant that the federal income tax rate in the U.S. during 1944 and 1945 was set to 94% for the very, very wealthy. And this was at a time applied to those earning over 200,000 US dollars, which today would amount to over 3 million. To over $3 million. So we're not talking about Bill Gates, but we are talking about people who might have a nice house in Boston, a summer house elsewhere, right? And this chapter of yours discusses why progressive taxes are important. This chapter of yours discusses why progressive taxes are important. You've also included a chart that demonstrates the need for a more progressive tax system in order to, quote, reduce political capture by the very rich, end quote. Now, political capture is something that we've been covering in the magazine and on the show, and it concerns me because of the kind of ideological seeding that we are all at risk of, meaning that any form of governmental program or NGO or private charities, you name it, could effectively disseminate an ideology more profusely, more profoundly than something that simply is not financed. Your report notes how the top 0.01% increased in their charitable donations since 1960. And you report that these patterns suggest a rising top-end inequality, which translates into unequal influence over philanthropy and politics. Can you give us some examples as to how this form of political capture is represented?
Well, yes, I will go. I will go by parts. I think it's very relevant. I also agree that it is one of the main findings and one of the main way forward. Um, so I think I will go first, talking about the progressive taxation and its importance, and other policies that can reduce inequality. So then I will talk about how we see progressive taxation, what is the status now, and then I will enter the part about the political capture, and figure 7.1 as you mentioned. So first, I think a good thing that we have discovered or that we document in the report is that inequality can be reduced, and this is a good news. So inequality can be reduced, and a way that we find that it can be reduced is through progressive taxation and redistributive policies. So progressive taxation is, if I earn more, I should pay proportionately more. And the more you earn, you should proportionally pay more taxes to the government. So this is our social contribution. No? It's how we contribute to society through our taxes. So if I have a company and I have lived in a country, and the laws of this country allowed me to build this company and to grow this company, I think, well, something just fair to do is, if this country allowed me to have this company and grow it and benefit from it, is just to pay the proportional share that I need to contribute to the country. So progressive taxation is, I mean, it's part of social justice. So the more you earn, the more you should pay. And if I see that some people can evade paying the share that they need to pay, then I feel less entitled to pay that. If I see that some people are not contributed, then I wouldn't want to contribute more. So progressive taxation first is important because it speaks to social justice. We all contribute our fair share, and if we see that we all contribute, we all want to keep contributing. Then it's progressive taxation by itself. It's a way in which we can reduce inequality. So if the people in the top are paying proportionately more than the people at the bottom, in the longer term, then we can expect inequality to be reduced. Then also an important part, well, there's also the very important part of the potential revenue. If the government can have more revenue from taxes being paid by people, and people with more income or wealth paying their proportion, their share, then the government can have more money to spend in policies that can reduce inequality and increase productivity and economic growth in the short and long term. And I'm a real advocate for policies in education and health that can increase the productivity and the living conditions, not only in the short term, so not only for the benefited individual, but also for the children or the potential children of the benefited individuals. So I think education and health are just very important, and we can invest in those. Government can invest in those with the potential revenue that can be obtained through progressive taxation. And then it's the part that you say of political capture. So, and this ties well to the figure 7.1. We document that the wealthier people, the richest people, have more influence over the political system. They spend a larger share of their income donating to charitable contributions or to political or giving political donations. So this means that they can have more influence over the political agenda, over which policies are taken by the governments. They have more time, they have more lobbying, they have more the ear of the politicians or the attention of the politicians, and they can directly influence which policies are undertaken or not. So if a global wealth tax is being, or not a global, but a national wealth tax is being spoken about, or an inheritance tax, or something that is not going to be good for them, they can influence the political agenda so that it is not so spoken about or not undertaken. And I think a clear example of how we see the political influence of the ultra wealthiest happened in the United States, no? Where a few months ago the richest man on the world, Elon Musk, was part of the government, and he had like access to all the information and access to the White House and access to the political decisions that could be made. And also, like, even Donald Trump, he's part of the privilege. He's part of the wealthiest people in the world, and he's taking actions in one of the most powerful countries, no? So we see that the political influence of these extra wealthy individuals, uh, well, shapes the policies that are taken in our countries and shapes the way that inequality can be reduced or increased.
Yeah. And in fact, that's what's interesting to me about this as well. Again, for the people listening, myself included, who are not schooled in economics, but just reading about the massive wealth rise or the massive wealth gap, together with that, the fact that in a country like the United States, during elections, one of the top three issues will be taxes. It'll be mentioned by both sides, and it seems to be this kind of disconnect as to the public purse means in terms of contribution to taxes, even if you go north of the border to Canada or south to Mexico, where both countries have a different regard from Americans for taxes. And I think part of this has to do with the social systems that have been created in both countries as opposed to the United States, where you have a much larger privatized sector, correct?
And I think it's also dependent on how governments invest these revenues that can get from taxes, that they can get from taxes. And I repeat that a very good way to reduce inequality and even foster productivity and economic growth is to invest in education and health. And so, yeah, if people have more skill because they learn more, they can be more productive over their life, increase their incomes and the ones from their families, and as a whole, economy can grow for more productive people. But then again, I wanted to talk about the graph about tax progressivity, and yeah, like I did not mention this in your previous question, but we see that the progressivity of countries such as the United States, Brazil, France, Netherlands, and Spain is reducing just at the very top. So they are very good. Governments are good in taxing people progressively to the top. So that until the 99% or 99.9%, or even the US, they are very good at taxing people even at the 99.99%. But then the progressivity is lost, and the effective tax rates that the wealthiest pay, they decrease. So we are in a level in which in which the billionaires are paying effective tax rates that are comparable to people in the middle class. So people in the middle class are paying as much taxes proportionately to their wealth and income compared to the billionaires. So I think there's a large revenue potential for the governments there, that this revenue could be used in redistributive policies such as education. And it's also the matter of reducing inequality. So I think progressive taxation is a matter that applies to to all countries, and in countries such as Mexico. So the US, we see that they are good in progressive taxation, but there are countries such as the ones in Latin America or sub-Saharan Africa, which are not so good even in progressive taxation. So more efforts are needed in those countries to ensure that progressivity is kept, and that even and that the revenue that the governments could have could be more, so inequality can be reduced.
You're listening to Savage Minds, and we hope you're enjoying the show. Please consider subscribing. We don't accept any money from corporate or commercial sponsors, and we depend upon listeners and readers just like you. Now, back to our show. And this brings us to your work, because as you've explained to me via email, you don't just work on this subject. In fact, your research in your doctoral program has much more to do with education and childhood. And the pieces you sent me that are related to your PhD work I found fascinating. From Playtime to Primetime, the medium-term effects of compulsory preschool in Mexico, and Starting Strong, medium and longer run benefits of Mexico's universal preschool mandate. Your work is looking at this nexus between public spending and educational and lifelong career outcomes.
Yes, thank you for the question and addressing that. So yes, so theoretically, and what we see in most of the literature, and the US has very good literature. So when we speak about literature in economic terms or in research, we speak about the academic papers that have been published or that are out there. And the US and several developed economies have a lot of papers in which they document that investing in education has a lot of good effects on the population because of what I said. We can see that there's higher incomes, higher productivity, higher employability, lower criminal rates, lower teenage pregnancies, lower drug abuse. Um, so yeah, like, there's a lot of good outcomes that can be found or can be produced from investing in education in the short term, as I mentioned. So the people that benefited from having an additional year of education or better education, so more quality, because there's the two dimensions, no? Quality and quantity. So better education or more education can have positive returns on the outcomes of a person, but it also has the potential of having more social cohesion. So at the national level or at the society level, it also can contribute for the society to be less unequal, to be more cohesive, and to be more productive as a whole, and to grow more as a whole. So this is why I am an advocate of investing in quality education. And what I want to do is also see, for me, it's important that to see if these policies are they have the same effects and the same benefits in developing contexts such as Mexico. And it's also important to say that there's evidence that investing in early childhood, so investing in education is good overall, but a critical period for investing in education is early childhood, because this is where the brain is more malleable. This is where you're developing your first skills, which will be the foundation of the next skills. So if you have good linguistic skills or good or if you have a strong foundation of skills, then the skills that you build on top of those skills keep adding up and can be better developed. So early childhood, so between 0 and 5 years, is a critical period for investment in education. And this is because of the skills, so the cognitive skills that you can develop in the future, such as math or linguistic skills, but also because of all the non-cognitive skills that you can develop. So this is the social-emotional skills, how do you say, the movement skills, the how do you relate to others. So all these non-cognitive skills that are more difficult to track. So I wanted to see if there was a policy that was implemented in Mexico in 2002, which made preschool universal for all children in Mexico. And what I wanted to know if the cohort that was benefited by this policy, from an additional year of schooling when they are in early childhood compared to the cohort 1 year above them, which was not affected. And we see that there's a positive effect. We see that the test scores when the children are in primary school increased. So the benefited children had better test scores, which is a proxy or a way that in which we approximate skill. So in these standardized test scores, they perform better. There is some drawbacks because I would have expected inequality to be reduced. So the people that came from more marginalized backgrounds to close the gap between the richer, so the kids coming from richer backgrounds. But I see that the gap did reduce between the middle class and the ones coming from the top income neighborhoods. But the ones in the poorer neighborhoods were not so benefited in the medium term. So so this is a way in which inequality was not reduced, and I think it has to do with the design of the policy that was not well implemented in these poorer neighborhoods. So I mean, this speaks to the design of the policies. Not only investing in more education is desirable, but also investing in better education. And what I'm currently working on is in seeing, so because this policy was implemented in 2002, now the treated children are in working age, and I want to explore if following them into the longer term, now that they're in the labor market, they can have more positive outcomes, so can be more employable or have higher incomes. We have already proven that they have higher high school graduation rates, but I want to explore now the labor outcomes. So that's basically the main findings.
That's so interesting. So your report basically found that early human capital investment actually closed the inequality gap.
Yes, exactly. So it's a way in which when we can reduce the inequality gap, education. Yes.
What do you think are the next logical steps for the Mexican government to take in refining its educational policies beyond your work on this subject?
Well, I think it should be a priority. We should not reduce the public expenditure in education, but expand it. Ensure that we have quality education so that our teachers are well certified and well trained to provide the skills for the children. Also, to make sure that high school is compulsory in Mexico since 10 years ago, and still we don't have full enrollment. So I think it's a little bit less than 60%. So we need to find a way also to keep our teenagers in school and to improve the quality of the system, to improve the conditions. So the infrastructure also has to be improved. I think this could be very beneficial in the present because we could have well, in the very short term, better living conditions for our people. But it's also how countries such as South Korea have had such a growth, no? How they have overtaken Mexico and how they have become such an economic powerhouse. It's the key for long-term development.
Absolutely. And you know of the UN statistics many years ago about literacy and women. The higher the literacy rates of women, the more social freedoms that they have within their societies. This reminds me of that study. And I'm thinking of your policy and research work as well, because you worked as director of domestic debt and issuance for the Mexican Ministry of Finance. Because you worked as director of domestic debt issuance for the Mexican Ministry of Finance. How has your experience managing national debt and infrastructure projects informed your academic approach to development economics?
Yeah, well, it gave me this policy experience to know how like what is the state of what we know and we don't know as policymakers, and what could help policymakers. So knowing how we evaluate project, how we define what is the rate of return, how do we choose in which projects to invest, knowing how we do that, and what are the needs of the society, and also what are the budgetary constraints of the government, has informed me to know how we can improve policy making, and also knowing the financial side of it. So how the markets work, how debt issuance work, how can we procure debt sustainability, has also informed my career on what are the budgetary restraints or constraints that the governments could have, and how can they be addressed. So I think it's complementary to my work, and I think it's something that helps me not just keep an academic eye on what I'm doing, but how can it be policy relevant?
Very interesting. And in terms of development economics, we've been covering this a lot on the show lately, where ideological capture through donors, private actors, can form part of the ideological mandate that drives NGOs. In development economics, is there also a kind of hierarchy of ideological capture? I'm thinking about the long disputed theory and practices of what has been called dependency theory. How do you view dependency theory from its development in the post-war era to today? Does it still carry credence, or has it become a sore spot for economists?
Well, first, to address your first part of the question. So, for instance, a lot of development or research, applied research in economics, in development economics, is done by the World Bank, for instance, or for multilateral banks such as the Inter-American Development Bank, and so others. No, and well, recent research from researchers here at the World Inequality Lab has found that the the decisions or the regions in which they choose to invest, it is not random, or it is not equitative. It's not equal across countries. So they are more prone to invest in countries which are more close to the more politically aligned with the United States, which is where they are based. And the same is true for the International Monetary Fund. And the voting rights and how the decisions are made, it's also influenced, or who has more power in these decisions is the United States and other developed economies. So even when we talk about the research that is done, or the investments in development, which is essential, well, it is also subject to being more politically aligned with the bigger economies. So it's an important part. And also we cannot expect, I think in chapter, so to address your second part of the question, we see that inequality between regions and between countries is not going to converge. I mean, the economies are not going to converge by market dynamics. We see that the institutional framework, that the political framework that we have arranged, the international financial and trade systems, how it is arranged in the present, it is arranged in a way that there are persistent transfers of income from poorer countries to richer countries. So approximately 1% of the global GDP is transferred in income from the poorer countries to richer countries, and this is due to the institutional arrangement. So if the dollar or the euro or similar currencies are perceived as safe by the market or agencies, by rating agencies, or trade is demanded to be in these currencies, or rules such as Basel III demand that central banks have reserves in these assets, such as the dollar or the euro, the yen, the Swiss franc, etc., then these currencies lock in a persistent demand. So countries will demand these currencies, and the price of so the rate that these countries, for example, the US will pay, will be much lower than the rate that a poorer country will pay. And then the debt that the US country will get will be at a very low rate compared to a poorer country. So then this differential in interest payments will make that there is a persistent income transfer for poorer nations. So for instance, the US, but in average to all the richer countries, they are getting transfers of income from the poorest countries. So this makes an imbalance, and this makes that the poorest countries cannot invest in redistributive policies that can reduce inequality and transferring this income through the institutional arrangement to the richer economies. So I think that even in inequality is entrenched in the institutions that we have. This is why I have also been an advocate, and I have also stressed that what we need is political will. What we need is democratic participation, and we need to pressure the people that rule us, that govern us, and choose the people that govern us that can reduce inequality and can make these political choices.
Yes, and we also know that often the IMF loan conditions harm national economies by creating private monopolies, thus increasing costs for essential services like water, energy, and health, worsening equality, leading to job loss, transferring national assets to foreign entities, and even prioritizing profit over public good. And we've seen this over and over and over historically, as I'm sure you know, because this was the model also of the Chicago School. So we can point to so many examples of this, including the way that the United States is punitive towards countries that do not yield to its desires, if you know what I mean. And we've seen this with the decades-long embargo of Cuba and many other countries, such as the more recent incidents with Venezuela, and then the recent kidnapping of that country's president. And we've seen this where the deal is this: we'll lend you money, but you do as we tell you. The U.S. commanding, and the U.S. has enormous command over the World Bank and IMF, let's not forget. These kinds of policies can destroy economies and countries. And on the other hand, the ideological resistance and propaganda that countries like the U.S. have put up again against, more recently, Venezuela, that countries like Venezuela that have maintained a focus on resisting monopolization, on privatization.
Well, so as I said, there's the Global Justice Project that we're working on that will be released in June. And as part of the Global Justice Project, we just published a paper a month ago that it's called Equality and Development. And well, in this paper, we show that we document that, well, first, inequality is not just going to disappear by itself by market dynamics, or it's not just going, like, it's not the natural order for inequality to decrease. So we need to take like actions, political actions, and we need the institutions to change. We need to take action. So, and we see that a period in which inequality reduced and it was combined with high productivity growth and high economic growth was between the decades of 1950 and 1980. So the main message is that we see that inequality can be reduced, and all we need is the political will to make the redistributed policies, to invest in labor rights, to ensure progressive taxation, to have democratic participation. All of these have been key in reducing inequality during this period, and it's a way in which we can reduce inequality and share the benefits of growth and a more prosperous world to all of us.
You often use microeconometric methods to analyze social policies. Is there a specific emerging data set or technology that you believe will revolutionize how we measure human capital over the next decade?
So the microeconometric methods are, like using these mathematical approaches or econometric approaches to try to prove causality So I won't invest too much time in that, but it's like trying to take something exogenous, so something we cannot control, and take that shock and to see how different groups of people behaved after this shock, and assuming this shock was random. So to prove causality. And this is how we can prove causality in economics. On the second part of the question, on the second part, if there is a technology that can increase, education or skills, well, I think AI has a big potential. No, if AI has big risks, but if we can use it right, there's also big potentials. If we can use it as a complement for education, if we can, if a person is interested in learning a subject, not just because they want to answer the questions of an exam, but they are interested in learning how to code, or they are interested in learning what are, I don't know, microeconometric methods, or what is, I don't know, the social conditions of such country. Like AI is a very powerful tool that can revolutionize the way we learn, and even specialize the learning at the individual level. So if my strength is not mathematical but it's musical, then I don't know, for say an example, then AI can tailor the way it teaches to me, because that's how powerful it is. It also has a lot of risks, but I think if we use it correctly, I see huge potential.
As you are from Mexico, and I've lived in your country and taught at one of your universities, and I'm a huge fan of your educational system. Aside from the excellent universities that you have all over the country, from the UNAM, Colegio de Mexico, too many universities to list here that are brilliant, I have something that I think is the most amazing feat of Mexican universities that I think should be adopted around the world. And it's this. It's a requirement that to get the licenciatura, the bachelor's degree, part of getting the bachelor's degree in Mexico involves having to undertake 480 hours of unpaid community service in the public institution. There are other requirements, of course, but this is something that I find amazing, this social giving back, where you have to do coursework, exams, potentially a thesis to receive a professional title. But in order to get a licenciatura or bachelor's, that you must take part of community service. And what I like about this is that it allows students, such as my students who were at the Universidad de las Americas, to pursue a bachelor's based on reality. And what I mean by this is Universidad de las Americas is a private institution, and the students that go there will tend to be the elite. So they might have come from wealth, but this system forces them to interact with all levels of society, including poverty, even to force an understanding to some degree, varying degrees, of what poverty means. And conversely, it also allows an access by the poor students who do go to your many wonderful public universities. It allows these students access to institutional reaches that they might never have had before, due to what happens even here in Europe, nepotism. Who gets the job in the city hall? Who gets the government job, right? We all know a lot of those decisions are made nepotistically. Could you talk a bit about your impressions of social service and some of the work that you do? Not that you've worked on this specifically, but I'm thinking of your work with the nurseries and how this might have been directly affected or indirectly affected by your having done your bachelor's degree in Mexico, having to participate in the social system.
Well, I think for me, as you say, was key. I do not mention this. I don't know. I never see an opportunity, but I think, and now it's opportunity. But I think it was very key to also form, like the way form where I want to do research. As you say, I went to university, and one of the requirements was to do this amount of social service hours. And what I choose my university, what it had the option, like one of the bigger options was to go to these rural communities in the Sierra of Hidalgo, so in the mountains, like 2 or 3 hours away from Mexico City. We would go every Saturday to give classes. So these communities So, well, the program was to go every Saturday to these communities, every Saturday for like a year, and then at the end, during the summer, we would go 2 weeks to the community, and so during the Saturdays that we would go to give classes in math or to give nutritional classes. Um, some there were different projects. No, some of them were trying for the people in these communities. We're helping them to create firms, so local firms. So if they were tea, if they wanted to produce tea plant, not like have the tea plants, but like make a product with it that they could sell. They were helping them. So this is what we did on Saturdays, and then during the 2 weeks that we went in the summer, we also helped like doing these activities, but also helping them in their own community. So if they were building a road, or if they were, I don't know, if there was a day that they were going to clean the center of the community, well, we were there, no? And as you say, I cannot experience what they experience day to day, but for me, it was impressive that we were 2 hours away from Mexico City, like this big metropolis with, I don't know, all the services and, I don't know, first world city. And they didn't have any electricity. They didn't have any running water. They didn't have, I don't know, a lot of services. The school was there, but there was only one teacher, and they like they combined all the students in one classroom. Uh, they had no ambition of going out of the community. They did not even see of like the possibility of students studying high school. Most of the men were not in the village because they emigrate either to Mexican larger cities or to the U.S. um, I don't know. It was impressive. It was impressive to see how unequal, because I knew how unequal Mexico City is, but how unequal it is, even with like within 2 hours distance. And well, even though I am not an expert, this has for sure given me some perspective of what are the conditions out there, and what are the constraints. So I guess to conclude, the social service, but yeah, I think in my experience it was instrumental, and I think it's a very valuable thing that we have, and I think it's a great policy by universities. So I think this is good.
You know why I asked you this? Because we had a leader recently kidnapped. And what do we see at the UN? All these heads of state or their representatives saying, they sort of sat on the wall. Everyone expressed outrage, sort of, but then they were like, he wasn't really elected. So it was a nothing burger. So, my question about your report, obviously, your report has incredible value and it should be heeded. But as we know, oftentimes, not just this report, but reports in general can come out, excellent reports can come out, and leaders point to it, and then a week later, it's forgotten.
Well, yeah, first, like in the first stage, it's a positive thing that the work that we do as researchers has this coverage and this visibility. So this is already a positive outcome. But then, I mean, so I would say, if I have three things that I would hope, is to keep progressivity. So keep progressivity all the way in distribution. So even at the top of the distribution. So if you are richer, you should pay more, proportionally more taxes. So I would say that's the first like base thing that the government should implement, and that entails taxing like the proposition of taxing the ultra wealthy, so the centimillionaires or the billionaires, with a minimum tax. In the report, we document what would happen, what would be the potential revenue from a 2%, 3%, or 5% tax, and we document that even at 3% tax would keep progressivity, and it would be enough to pay for the public expenditure in education in South and Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. No? So the potential revenue is huge if we're talking at the global level. Of course, it's difficult for the different governments to articulate a global tax, but there can be unilateral policies that can be implemented. And I think it's positive, for example, that in France they're talking about a tax on billionaires, even if it has been proposed 2 times in the National Assembly and it has not been approved by the Senate. I think that the fact that the policy is being discussed, and like the broadcasting of the policy is so huge, I think it's already a very good outcome, and I think it's a matter of time in which such a policy or a similar policy can be implemented here or in other parts of the world. And if we disseminate and we see, for example, in Mexico or in other countries, that we see that these policies are being spoken about in other countries, we can also learn about them and try to be more informed. And then the third thing I like, the third policy that I would stress again is investing in quality education. I think it's a very powerful way in which we can reduce inequality. And then I will say a fourth one, which we have not talked about a lot, about the political cleavages and political differences, and the difficulty to form political coalitions, which is the eighth chapter of the report, and I think it's also very important. But I think it's very important to be politically engaged and to be politically active, and to have a democratic participation. Sometimes we get frustrated with the outcomes of democracy, but if we are not engaged, if we are not active, then the system is not working. I think it's a way in which we can influence, and I don't know, it's frustrating sometimes, but I think we should not get discouraged.